Finally, and definitely not the least, I have Mr. Theo Lawson, who is, as we know, the person that is behind Freedom Park, has done a lot of work in terms of setting up Freedom Park, and also even continues to do quite a bit in saying, how do we continue to bring our communities together? How do we create spaces for them? And how do we provide relevant, accessible culture and content for them? So Mr. Lawson, do you want to just share a bit before we start? Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Theo Lawson. I'm an architect, and I think I was probably one of the most fortunate architects, because it's every architect's dream to, get the opportunity to do a dream project like Freedom Park. And essentially, it happened by accident or by providence, because the initial concept was in 1999 when a group of architects got together under the aegis of the CIA, which is called the Creative Intelligence Agency. And we thought we would let's put some ideas forward for Lagos in the future, Lagos of the millennium. Different firms came up with different ideas, and I particularly wanted to build a park. I felt Lagos needed its own space where people could just go and breathe because of the congestion in Lagos Island. And at the time, the old prison seemed the only viable space, because all the buildings had been pulled down since the 70s. And it was just a vagrant center, a center for vagrants and stuff. So looking at this space, doing the research on this space, found out it was historical. It was a prison for 100 years. People like Awolowo, Jakonde, and many others had been incarcerated there. So it went from being just a park to becoming a memorial space where we could celebrate our heroes past. And then how do you make space sustainable? I mean, people come to the park, okay, parks close at night, so it's no longer useful. As a museum, people, once you've been there once, you don't go back. So I thought if I invited the arts community to adopt the space, that would now give it some level of activity, constant activity, evolving activity that would make it sustainable and keep the space going, running independently or self-sustaining. That was fine this was, like I said, the initial idea was 10 years before it was actually manifested. The initial idea went with all the CIA reports to the government at the time, and nothing came out of it until, in passing, I was talking with somebody who happened to be a special advisor to Fashola, who passed the synopsis to Fashola. 2 weeks later, I was meeting Fashola to present the idea. And a month after that, I met with the EXCO and they approved the project. So it was where stars align. So like I said, it was every architect's dream where things like that happen. And although it took 10 years in gestation, but essentially it happened at the right time, and it coincided with Nigeria's 50th independence, the commissioning of the space. So everything just seemed to be providence. But since then, Freedom Park has become, it's gone through a lot of phases. When Fashola left, the incoming government had issues with a lot of Fashola projects. And so we had a commissioner who went to shut down the park, cut down the trees, and make it an arena like TBS. So he actually had drawn up plans and everything. He thought the memorial was, the fact that it was a museum was irrelevant. All government was about then was the money, the income. He knew how much money he could generate if he had the band perform a 10,000-man concert at that arena. So basically, priorities and different governments change. Our government's interests or government's objectives can impact, what everybody thinks might be a good idea. But just having a good government at the right time, or having a good ear listening in at the right time helps. But we survived various administrations where battling our way through the politics of running this space. But I think we were doing quite well before COVID. We're one of the top 5 places to visit if you're in Lagos. And post-COVID, everybody's working from home, so traffic has eased down a bit. And now we're becoming more of a community center. We have always attracted the kids in the area, but now more than ever, the kids come in to avoid issues of gang warfare on the island and also police harassment. But we also have adopted community of hemp smokers, which we try to manage. But all in all, we are a community service-oriented space. Thank you. I've rambled on a bit too long. We'll talk a bit more about the space and its evolution later. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Lawson, I'm going to come to you. Just because I think that from what we've said now, there's one part for the residents, but there's also something else for the visitors. And you've explained some of the challenges in terms of, administration, and Ms. Silva has preferred some sort of suggestion of how some of that can be dealt with in terms of long-term concessions, but it's also about ensuring that these concessions are enforced. But for us, it's the sense that when we're looking at Lagos Island, many residents spoke about the experiences of swimming pools, love gardens, and that these spaces don't exist anymore. And I know you've shared some of your own challenges and struggles in getting a place like Freedom Park to thrive. But can you share some of the lessons learned so that if you had to do this again, how do we ensure that we can also transform other spaces? Because the idea again is to have other spaces that, and I think Olamide will share more about the distance that needs to be from one. Olamide, actually, could you share what is the distance that residents should have from one public space to their houses? I think you mentioned this at the press release. I can't remember.
Actually, I have no idea. I don't know about public space. I think Chuka mentioned 3 minutes. I think 3 minutes is a good distance, actually. But I know, for example, I don't know if necessarily for public space, but for walking, you shouldn't have to walk more than, you shouldn't have to walk more than 10, I think it's 10 minutes to be able to get public transport. And again, that's fine for an able-bodied person. But for example, if you have some kind of a disability or, there's another issue, you're a bit older, even 10 minutes may be even too long for public transport. So we've got to link all of these things together. And even thinking about public spaces, I don't want to delve into it too much, but everything about public spaces.
On your video, we can't see you. But
sorry. Because I was on the panel, I turned my video off. I'm so sorry. Even thinking about public spaces, we also have to think about, is it inclusive? And to ensure that the public space is something that everybody can use. I mean, we've done a lot of work on not public space as in parks, but public space as in road design, and to ensure that people can use those spaces. And Ms. Joke Silva also mentioned the fact of the traders, and how do we make sure that we design for the traders instead of thinking of them as an afterthought or thinking of them as someone that's intruding into like walking space. Well, how do we include them? Because as Mr. Chuka also mentioned, it's something that we are used to and we live with. We enjoy that interaction of buying a banana or buying a Fanta or buying gala or whatever it is. We like that interaction. We're used to it. So how do we make sure we incorporate it into the design of public spaces? But I think some really great points coming out. So I'm really excited to go to the Q&A, but keep going, Ad.
Yes, and just to say that we will go to the Q&A soon, because I know that we've been having some questions. But yes, so 10 minutes, that was it. 10 minutes in terms of being able to access public amenities, but also amenities for residents. You shouldn't have to drive from one place to the other to access something that should be, you should have to be able to walk. And I guess it's a plug for Ludi. They've just had the first car-free day in Lagos, which was on Sunday. And it's all those little events and activities that are going to start to help us to come together and create systems that work both for the creative industries, but for the residents as well as the urban planners. Well, Mr. Lawson, please, over to you. Can you just share some of the lessons you learned from this, such that if you had to do this again, what would you do differently? Thank you for Freedom Park.
Thank you. Actually, during the COVID lockdown, we tried to revive another CIA ensemble. got together again, and again thought, look, post-COVID, the whole world's changing. Everything's going to change. And we saw immediately after COVID, there was the NSAS protests, which led to the NSAS riots, which somehow everybody thinks is over. I personally believe it's sort of like a quiet before the storm. Things have not changed. Same poverty exists, if not worse. I mean, things are getting quite bad right now. Costs are rising, insecurity is rising. So, but we are going on as if nothing's changed. Okay, let's get back to status quo without addressing those issues of congestion in Lagos Island, unemployment and stuff. So during the COVID lockdown, a group of us got together again and said, okay, look, what can we do to Lagos if all chaos breaks loose and Lagos cannot, I mean, everything is destroyed. The whole world economy is destroyed because of the COVID situation. Economies have stopped. So what do we do? How do we rebuild Lagos? So I had this idea called the Lagos Spine that relied on old money that dwelt on the Ikoyi axis. Family with old money that is not Novorish. I mean, essentially, if you took an axis from Falomo to, let's say, I took it all the way to Akpongmon. Along that stretch, you have retail, you have cultural spaces like the Randall, the Onikon area, where you have cultural centers. Awolowo Road, you have retail, down to the commerce on Broad Street and Akpongmon area. So how do we develop these areas in such a way that becomes catalyst to impact everything else around it? So we looked at abandoned buildings, take buildings that have been abandoned, like the Independence Building. At the time, I thought, okay, Independence Building is an iconic building, and one of the problems we had was healthcare. I mean, the COVID pandemic showed the problems with healthcare in Nigeria and Lagos as a whole. So that could be, I said, if we converted that building into a specialist hospital and made like an iconic center to represent a new way forward or a new approach to healthcare, develop a specialist hospital where all the floors are taken up by special equipment, consultants, and everything. Okay, that's one project, but lots of projects along the line to essentially recreate or create catalyst projects. There are lots of abandoned buildings. The old nursing school, which has been pulled down right now, we thought of converting to an old people's home because old people should not be thrown away into the bush somewhere. Thought being on the Ikoyi axis, the old people could actually go out for walks in the evening and still feel part of the community. And it was a building that was very nice and still very stable, still very strong building. I don't know why it was pulled down, but we heard that powers that be. Other projects, other buildings like the old secretariat, which I thought would be a great colonial museum to our colonial history, so we don't forget. A lot of buildings we're losing. A lot of buildings are being pulled down, so we could actually talk about the history of Lagos, not just in government, but also in architectural sense. I was fortunate to be involved in the development of the Tinubu or the Alaya House on Tinubu Square. So that was part of the project as well. But basically, the idea was to look at different buildings along the way, which could become like motivators. And all these things were supposed to be done by direct labor. So this would be creating employment and got everybody involved, whole community involved in it. I thought Lagos Island would also need to be decongested. People right now live about 10 to a room or more. And I thought a building like, what do you call it, the old secretariat, Ikoyi, could be converted into I wouldn't say tenement. I wouldn't use the word tenement because that would probably be said negatively. But if you develop nice self-contained apartments, room and parlor apartments, or face me and face you, but the grounds would also incorporate things like swimming pools, tennis courts, football fields, or football pitches, where people actually had a sense of community, but it would not become a slum, which a lot of people thought it could become. I used a case study. The building, is it the Ponty Center in Johannesburg, where you have to be employed to take residence in there, and you enter by card. There's a key card access. So if you have not credited your card, you cannot get into the apartment. So if you'd have to be employed, you'd have to have a job, and hence a source of income. Whether you're a bricklayer, you're whatever it is, there must be some income, some form of employment. Minimal income, minimal rent, but you must be responsible. I see a lot of resemblance between Lagos Island and Bahia in Brazil. Even with all the new developments going on, all the terrace buildings along Akpongbon and Bushiri and Co. A coat of paint and some TLC will make that place. And also probably providing curbs, walkways, public walkways would probably make Lagos Island look distant again, especially with hopefully decongestion of the populace into abandoned buildings, properly redesigned, especially because right now people are working from home. A lot of the office buildings are becoming empty. So maybe it's time to look at those empty buildings or those office buildings and engage architects to redesign them into more useful uses, applications. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for what you've shared. And just in terms of a summary, basically it's a sense of we also almost need to be researchers. We need to look around our spaces, identify places that are perhaps empty, abandoned, and come up with concepts, or work with architects and planners to come up with concepts that can help to work. And this is not like something that's only unique to Nigeria. I remember, or even Lagos Island, King's Cross in London, there was a time that it didn't look like it did. And what had happened was the residents again and private investors had to come together to say, how do we change the face of it? How do we responsibly gentrify this space? Because there's something called, you can look at gentrification in different ways, but how do we improve on it for safety, for security, but in an inclusive manner that gives it an uplift? And it's ensuring that this is done with a nod to preservation, to heritage preservation, but also, like Mr. Lawson said, it's that sense of coming up with solutions as opposed to only identifying problems. But again, it's how do we push together to ensure that these changes can be held. So we need to become researchers. We need to look at simple solutions. Some of it, like I said, can just be about painting. Others can really look at how do we even have more live, work, and play development so that you can live at a certain level, you can work, and you can also play. And those are ways that the buildings can also be transformative. So we'll just quickly go to some questions in the chat box, and I'll pass this on to our panelists because we are still on time, but I think it's important that we allow other questions to be put forward before we conclude and go to the next steps, and Olamide gives us our closing remarks. So some of the questions that we have are looking at what plans do we have to rejuvenate the activities and community engagements, and how do we also have engagement activities, because a while back, carnivals were banned because miscreants took advantage. But in 2020, the Abu Residents Association was able to organize a carnival, but it was called an open house event. So the name was changed, and they did quiz competition, and they also did different things. So the question, and I guess this is to Ms. Silva, is to say, how do we formalize and organize more events for people in our communities? And what I'll do, I'll just go through the questions and then just appoint the different panelists that will respond. And then we'll just respond to this in 1 or 2 minutes so that we can close before 12 o'clock, which is the stated time. So that's question 1, Matt, to you. How do we formalize and organize more some of what you are doing and also engage communities? The second question is, how are corporate entities being courted to actively participate in all of these infrastructure developments? And I think this goes to Alhaji Muse, because you spoke about, Victoria Island and residents, and so you can respond to that. And I guess Dolapo as well, you can also respond a bit to that, to talk about what's happening with estate intel and some of what you're also doing in terms of real estate advocacy for the developers, because I know that that's your developers and private investors. Solomon has a question of brown envelope disease. I think that is beyond the remit of this panel. I don't know that we can address that. Shemu has a question on, I want to create a public space that fosters recreation, but I don't live on the island. What should I consider in designing, and what are the regulations to note? I think Chuka can respond to that. And then I can also respond to that, because this isn't really about everyone living on the island. That's not the case. This is just a pilot so that we can learn and replicate. So just to repeat, Ms. Silva, you'll answer the first question on formalizing and organizing so we can do more things in community. Dolapo, please, Alhaji Muse, you will answer in terms of getting corporate entities, some of what has worked. Dolapo, you will share with us what you're doing as estate intel. And then Chuka, you can advise on some of these things to consider in other spaces beyond the island. And then Mr. Lawson, I'll come back to you if we do get any other question. So thank you. Please, 1 minute each, if possible. Thank you. Mr. Lawson, I really just would like your own closing remarks, because I know that you've explained a bit on the spine, but for me, it's also that sense of financing and funding. And I know we've spoken about this quite a lot, but can you just share in about 30 seconds, some of how you think that we can also finance and fund this? Because the idea is not for creatives to be the ones to finance and fund, even though that happens quite a bit, and I'm sure Ms. Silva can also share some stories, but we really also need to create a way that either it's corporate or it's residents or it's, like Lola said, it's tax. How do we start to fund some of these things, and what are the ways we can show a proof of concept or proof of that this is a viable social investment? 30 seconds, please.
Yeah, I think the corporate sector essentially are very lazy right now. They invest in what I say already made brands. Say, for instance, let me take music industry. People like Wizkid, Davido and co. will continue to get corporate endorsement because they're already made. That's a success story already. So invest in success stories rather than investing in developing new talent, investing in new ideas and incubating new projects. So it really goes down to the corporate empathy right now. We need to wake up the corporates to their responsibility, to actually be have a sense of responsibility towards development rather than being profit-centered all the time. They'd rather invest, like I said, in already made deals than already made brands than invest in new ones. So I think that's where to start. Government definitely wouldn't do it without satisfying their personal interests.